Welcome to the lecture on self-reflection. In this lesson, we'll look at ways that we can encourage self-reflection in the classroom and beyond. We have talked about metacognition, or thinking about thinking, in earlier lessons, but here we'll talk more explicitly about it as a teaching strategy. Foucault's écriture de soi, or ancient Greek self-writing, gathered knowledge and thoughts in notebooks and transferred that knowledge to others in correspondence. Through the process, both of gathering materials, one could turn the self from an object of knowing to a being of action. That's the point here. We want students to do more than reflect on what they know as though they were fixed containers for knowledge. Rather, we want them to understand how they know things so that they can apply and share those behaviors with others and cultivate a growth mindset. Encouraging self-reflection at all stages of the critical and creative thinking process helps students consider and evaluate not just what they are producing, but how and why they are understanding material in the way that they are, and how they might improve. Almost all of the intellectual standards provide a great foundation and continuity between assignment prompts and reflective questions. Here are a few examples of how some of the intellectual standards might be used to encourage self-reflection. In trying to help students think about significance, you could ask, is this an important problem to focus on? For breadth, do we need to consider another perspective? In fairness, do I have a vested interest in this issue? For logic, does what I say follow from the evidence? And flexibility or adaptability, did, would, or should you adjust your thinking to changes in the situation or context? There are a number of thinking routines that can help our students think out loud and practice intentional and scaffolded thinking. Both of these come from Artful Thinking and the Harvard Graduate School of Education. The first routine, What Makes You Say That, is an interpretation with justification routine that has two core questions. It first asks for an interpretation of something and then asks for a justification of that interpretation. This exercise can be done with a number of types of media, from visual to textual to audio, and across many different disciplines and topics. This is a great exercise for introducing a new concept or topic and for drawing out previous knowledge. The second routine, Claim, Support, Question, is a reasoning routine and good for practicing how to support and justify claims, as well as to build arguments and consider alternatives. In this routine, students might make a claim about an image, a topic, or a reading. Then they identify support for that claim and suggest questions that are related to it. Let's practice the interpretation with justification routine. Take a moment to look at this picture and observe it. What do you see? What do you recognize and identify individually within the image? What does the image make you think about? What is your interpretation of what is going on? You may pause the recording here. Now that you have a general interpretation of the image, what made you interpret the image that way? What is your frame of reference, prior knowledge, and/or worldview that might contribute to this interpretation? If you were from another country, do you think you would have the same interpretation? In this exercise, follow-up questions are incredibly important to help students dig deeper. As a group exercise, it can be a great way to illustrate how similar people have wildly different interpretations of something. It can also illustrate the idea that there are not always one right answer, but alternative answers that have varying degrees of novelty, logic, and/or relevance, to name a few. Reflective prompts can be used to guide a conversation about the way that different experiences and prior knowledge affect those interpretations. For example, what prior knowledge did you activate during this process of interpretation? Did your interpretation change in reaction to others' interpretations? Why or why not? Would you approach the task differently in the future? Why or why not? We'll revisit some of the questions we introduced earlier in the lessons and modules to more directly illustrate how reflective questions can be used at different stages of the critical and creative thinking process. In raising questions and formulating problems, reflection questions revolve around the ways student might be approaching questions or problems. Questions like, is this an important problem to consider? Is the idea original? What is the scope of the question? What is the broader context or situation of this question? What assumptions and biases do I bring to the issue at hand? In gathering and assessing relevant information, we might prompt students with, Is the information relevant? What is the source of this information? Is it reputable? Is it biased? Do I have a vested interest in this issue? And am I sympathetically representing the viewpoints of others? To challenge students during the idea generation stage, we might ask them, are my ideas novel and diverse? Am I approaching the question from diverse perspectives? Am I limiting possible divergent ideas due to pre-existing assumptions? And which ideas could be combined and which should be developed further? To better consider our alternatives, we might ask students to consider, are the alternatives adaptable to different contexts? How well does each alternative meet the criteria of the question? And in revisiting the initial problem question, does this solution or interpretation address all dimensions of the problem? Let's think about questions we might want our students to ask themselves related to the conclusions that they reach. We might want them to ask things like, does this conclusion logically follow from the evidence? Are there alternative conclusions? How might I test those? Did I weigh the benefits and drawbacks of different ideas? And finally, in communicating what they have concluded, they might ask themselves, do I understand my audience and how best to communicate to them? Am I using appropriate communication media, verbal, written, visual, etc.? Do I connect it to overarching principles and the big idea effectively? Writing is an extremely effective way to see students thinking. Discussion or physical expression with movement or drawing are also excellent modalities, but can be more difficult to evaluate regularly. Short, frequent, self-reflective writing prompts can transform your class. Writing increases students' participation, it increases students' communication skills, it encourages critical and creative thinking, and as a teacher, it can help you know your students better. Students can be intimidated by writing or think of it as something that they do once they have everything figured out, rather than as a part of the development process. So, introducing low stakes writing where they are allowed and even encouraged to take risks can lower some of the barriers that they might face. Some of the benefits of low stakes writing exercises can be easily they can be easily constructed and not very time consuming. They can serve a large range of goals, and they do not necessarily require any grading, though you could use a very simple grading system, check, plus, minus, scale, 5-point scale, etc., if that's important. Introducing these written reflections at the beginning of a class or a new topic can also help students open up and reveal that they are in an intellectually safe space where risk-taking is encouraged. Questions or prompts like, write down one question you have about the reading for today's lesson and what you are most interested in learning more about. How does the topic we will talk about today relate to previous coursework or other classes you are taking? Write or draw what you already think or know about the topic. What assumptions and biases do you bring to the issue at hand? What are the broader context or situation related to this topic? And why is this problem, topic, or issue important? Closing reflective prompts are opportunities for students to think about what they just learned or went through while it's still fresh in their mind. Some strategies and exercises here are things like minute papers or exit slips. And questions that you might ask, how has your understanding of X or the topic changed? What kind of connections did you make in class today to prior knowledge? Suggest a modification to the experiment we discussed in class today that would make it more objective. Reflect on an assumption or how your thinking has changed as a result of this lesson or discussion. What do you need to explore next in terms of thoughts and or actions? And of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Other reflective prompts might encourage students with more open-ended questions about what they found rewarding or challenging about the lesson and why, how they solved a problem or reached a conclusion or found an answer, asking them to reflect on alternative interpretations or different perspectives on what you have read or done in the course, and making comparisons, connections between topics that you're learning in the current course and other things across other courses or program materials, and how the new ideas challenge what they already know. One specific exercise that might be useful to many is the 3-2-1, where you ask students to identify and record 3 words that they think are important and essential to the meaning of the text. They then record two phrases that are important to the text argument and one sentence. This does not have to be the thesis. It could be a sentence that they found particularly well written or thought provoking. This exercise can be used for discussion, as homework, or as an asynchronous exercise that are posted to forums like Moodle or Padlet or Mural. Padlet is a great resource for writing and reflection because it creates a resource bank for students and allows them to see others' questions and comments. It creates a collaborative space for idea generation and can be used in or out of class. After you create an account, you can post a question and make sure you give access to the post and share the link with the student. So it's also incredibly easy to share. Socrative is another great resource that can be especially useful for opening and closing questions, and we encourage you to explore other platforms that might also serve similar purposes. Outside of class, reflective writing can take two basic forms, formative and summative. Formative includes ongoing thinking throughout the process. And platforms can include journals, blogs, learning logs, like what we're using in this course, and discussion boards. These help students form ideas and novel approaches. Summative writing focuses more on how they approach certain aspects of the assignment or the project or the topic and helps them identify what they did well, what they could have done better, and or how they changed or transformed throughout the project. Here is an example of a student blog entry using the 321 journal entry that is formative. It asks students to formulate ideas and questions in preparation for an in-class discussion. And here's an example of a summative reflective prompt at the end of a project, asking a student to reflect on their process and their learning. Citing a specific example, did you take any linguistic risks when writing your journal? For example, did you try using a new word or phrase? How did that work out? Would you try this phrase again? Would you try this tactic again? Do you think that not taking risks enhances or limits language learning? If you did not take any risks, why? In summary, self-reflection is a core teaching strategy and is the way that students learn and apply what they've learned to other situations. While the resources for this lecture are still fresh in your mind, take a moment to think and write down some questions that you might ask your students to prompt self-reflection.